The Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett himself, just trimmed down his position in both Delta and Southwest. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about my opinion on the airlines in this whole current situation we have going on here, and why I believe he trimmed down his position in the airlines. And when I say Warren Buffett sold his stake, I really mean Berkshire Hathaway, his company, and they sold around $314 million worth of Delta, and then sold around $74.3 million worth of Southwest shares. So really, he's trimming down his position in both companies. This brings his ownership to, as you can see in this small snippet, down below 10% within the company. What's interesting is Warren Buffett has always been one to say that airlines is an industry that he doesn't like to invest in just because of the high fixed overhead. You have lower margins, you have strong labor unions, and one of the funnier quotes he has is, "I have an 800 toll-free number now that I call if I get the urge to buy an airline stock. I call at 2 in the morning and I say, 'My name is Warren and I'm an airaholic.' And then they talk me down." So the real question is, should you be selling Delta or Southwest if you own these airlines? As I said, Warren is only cutting down a percentage of his stake, so he still has 10% of these companies. So he obviously still has some belief that these companies can turn around. Now, with the whole current situation going on, obviously flights are not happening as frequency, or people just are not flying at all. There is no ban on domestic travel or anything, but obviously the revenue has plummeted. I believe Delta's revenue has plummeted around 80%. So obviously that is a huge hit, and I don't know if, with the amount of cash that they have, how long they can last without taking out additional debts. So that is kind of the concern for me in terms of how much time or how much is their burn rate until they run out of cash and start running into issues. Now, with the stimulus package and everything going on with that, I feel like the airlines have a little place in that act, basically saying that they can get some bailout loans in order to hold over these tough times when they're running into cash flow issues. But let's look at the financials to see kind of how Delta and Southwest compare to the other airlines in the industry. So first, looking at Delta Airlines, they were trading around $22.48 on Friday, but then in after hours, they actually dipped down to 20% on the news that Berkshire Hathaway was trimming its positions. If you look at this monthly chart, you can see February they're around $60, and now they're at $22. So obviously they've gotten absolutely hammered with the whole current situation. So if we look at some of the financials in terms of Delta, let's see kind of where they're sitting at, because really I'm looking at how much cash does the company have versus their operating expenses to figure out how long they can last without having to take additional debt out. If you look at the amount of cash that they have on hand at the end of 2019, so you can see it's $2.8 billion. So let's look at to see kind of where it costs them to run the business. So if we look at a quarterly basis, it is around $9 million of cost of revenue, and then you have another, let's say, $1 million. So let's say it's around $10 million to run the business, and their revenues are $11 million. So the CEO said around 80% is going to be lost in terms of revenue. So let's get this around $2.5 million versus, let's say, if you cut this in half, let's say it's $5 million. So we're right about like $2.5 million to $3 million that they're going to lose over a quarter in this current situation, if they're even able to cut at 50% of their fixed costs, or that total cost of revenues, right? So those are some assumptions, so it may be even higher. But they have around $3 billion worth of cash, so we could say that they could run about a quarter at this level. The one nice thing about Delta is it does have a pretty good net profit margin. So around 10% is one of the higher airlines' profit margins when you compare it to other companies. So when you look at Delta as a company when things are running normally, they are one of the leaders in the airlines, and that's why I believe Warren Buffett has investments in them, as well as Southwest. Both of those companies are really well run. You have Delta, with the ability, they're vertically integrated, so usually they get really good pricing, and they're able to hedge their pricing on oil. So I know a lot of their cost is related to fuel and things like that. So as a company, when things were normal a few months ago, they're running pretty smoothly. If we take a look at Southwest, they have around $4 billion worth of cash and cash equivalents, which is pretty good. And then if you look at a quarterly basis, kind of like we did with Delta, you can see if we apply the same percentages, about 1.5 billion in revenue. If they cut expenses in half, they would be close to 2.5. So around $1 billion per quarter, or let's say $1.5 billion. So they're able to ride out this storm a little longer without dipping into debt. So I believe they're positioned a little better. They're not as highly leveraged as Delta, which is a good thing. And then as a quick comparison, their net profit margin is around 9%, which is pretty good once again for an airline. So what's my overall position in this whole thing? I believe that airlines will rebound eventually. I think for now, I wouldn't touch them personally for a couple months to see kind of how the situation plays out. I think there needs to be a little stabilization, but you do have the oil prices being lower, and people aren't going to stop flying. So eventually when this is all over, people will start to fly again, and more people will be okay with traveling. And when that happens, you should see a turnaround. Now, the longer this lasts, the more debt that these companies will have to bring on, which will cut into their profits in the future as they pay down those debts, and you load up the liabilities on the balance sheet. But I think if this lasts for a quarter or two, they'll be able to bounce back in a year or two. So what I'm waiting for is a little stabilization, and if the price comes down another 50%, I might start to pick up a little bit more of a position. Hope you guys enjoyed my take on the whole situation, and if you do enjoy this kind of content talking about investing, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Main Street Wolf, and enjoy your day. Have a great day.